What did it cost to be yourself in Hollywood's golden closet? In the 1970s, 10 incredibly talented actresses lived double lives, hiding their truth in an industry that wasn't ready to embrace it. These women were icons on screen, yet lived in fear of scandal off it. This is their story. Stay with us as we reveal the hidden lives of 10 lesbian actresses who dared to love in silence. Barbara Stanwyck. Though her peak was earlier, Barbara Stanwyck remained a revered figure through the 1970s. Rumors about her sexuality had quietly followed her for decades, but she always dodged the question with charm and calculation. Behind her commanding screen presence and endless string of roles as tough, no-nonsense women was a private life filled with secrets. Stanwyck never remarried after her divorce from actor Robert Taylor, whom some biographers say was arranged by the studio to quash whispers. In the 1970s, as gay liberation simmered beneath the surface of American culture, Stanwyck kept her distance. She was intensely private and fiercely protective of her reputation. While many close to her, including co-stars and personal assistants, suspected or knew she had deep relationships with women, she remained adamant about keeping it out of the press. Her devotion to longtime companion Helen Ferguson, a publicist, has been well documented by Hollywood historians. They shared a home, traveled together, and were nearly inseparable. Yet to the outside world, Helen was just a friend. In reality, they lived a quiet love story under the shadow of an industry that didn't allow the light in. Stanwyck's legacy is legendary, but behind the awards and accolades was a woman who couldn't speak her truth, because to do so might have ended her career overnight. Sandy Dennis. Sandy Dennis, the Academy Award-winning actress known for her eccentric charm and emotionally raw performances, always seemed just a little too quirky for the Hollywood mold. She rose to fame in the 60s and continued to take challenging, offbeat roles through the 1970s. But behind her unconventional persona was a woman deeply afraid of the world discovering who she truly was. Dennis had relationships with men, including a high-profile one with musician Jerry Mulligan, but those closest to her said those pairings were more about appearances than passion. She was shy, reserved, and famously difficult to pin down. As the sexual revolution blossomed, Sandy's truth remained buried. Her preference for women was an open secret among theater colleagues, but never acknowledged in the media. What made Sandy Dennis stand out in this tragic narrative was her desire for solitude. She often surrounded herself with stray animals, cats, dogs, even raccoons, claiming she found more honesty in them than in people. That wasn't just eccentricity, it was a metaphor. She trusted creatures who didn't judge, unlike the industry she depended on. Dennis never came out publicly before her death, and she left behind no tell-all interviews or bombshell memoirs. But her private life, shared with close female friends and longtime companions, paints a quiet, dignified portrait of a woman who loved deeply but silently, and whose fear of exposure was perhaps greater than any stage fright. Paty Kelly. In the 1930s, Paty Kelly was Hollywood's loudmouth sidekick, wisecracking, brassy, and irresistibly bold. But by the 1970s, she was enjoying a quieter career revival in theater and occasional film appearances. What few knew then was that Paty Kelly had been openly gay within inner circles for decades, even claiming in a rare 1960s interview that she never pretended to be anything else. But being open didn't mean being embraced. Despite her comic genius, Kelly's career was long hampered by her sexuality. Studios saw her as a liability, and roles dried up fast. By the 1970s, she had become one of those familiar faces who'd never quite reached her potential. Yet behind that decline was a proud woman who refused to hide. Her long-term relationship with actress Wilma Cox was never featured in fan magazines, but among theater friends and certain Hollywood old-timers, they were known as a couple. Still, the 70s didn't offer much space for Kelly to reclaim her place as a pioneer. While society was starting to shift, the damage of earlier decades had already been done. Paty Kelly didn't hide in the traditional sense. She lived her truth within the walls of her own world. But the system silenced her long before audiences were ready to listen. Her courage deserves remembrance. 4. Matteline Anderson. Best known for her trailblazing work behind the camera, Matteline Anderson also held a deep passion for acting in the early 70s. While she never became a household name as an actress, her pioneering efforts as a filmmaker in documentaries and public television earned her enormous respect. But hidden within her determined public persona was a truth she rarely discussed: her identity as a lesbian. Anderson was active during the most politically fraught period for both women and Black creators in media. She faced intersectional discrimination that made survival in the industry a daily fight. As one of the first Black women to direct a televised documentary and become part of the Directors Guild of America, she couldn't afford the added controversy of being an out lesbian. Her private relationships were quiet and often concealed from industry colleagues. While she was passionate about civil rights, LGBTQ+ activism remained off limits in her public work. The fear wasn't just personal, it was professional suicide. Yet Anderson's quiet bravery lay in her perseverance. She may not have worn a rainbow flag, but she carried the weight of two marginalized identities and still moved mountains. Her legacy reminds us that hiding wasn't always cowardice. It was sometimes the only way to survive while breaking down doors for others. Nancy Culp, best remembered as Miss Jane Hathaway on the Beverly Hillbillies, Nancy Culp was always the loyal secretary in the eyes of the public. But those close to her knew she was a fiercely intelligent, deeply private woman who kept a major part of herself hidden: her sexuality. Culp's role as the prim, unmarried Jane gave audiences permission to speculate. Still, the topic of her personal life never made it to press. She played it safe. In the early 1980s, she made a subtle nod to her identity in an interview, saying she liked her own kind. But in the 1970s, there was no room for that kind of revelation. Off-screen, she lived a quiet life and had lasting relationships with women, though none were ever acknowledged publicly. Culp also ran for Congress in the 80s, but even then avoided the topic. She wasn't ashamed, just guarded. She knew the price of honesty in an industry built on illusion. Nancy Culp lived a life of service, humor, and quiet resistance. Her performances may have been comedic, but her private courage was nothing short of dramatic. Lily Tomlin. In the 1970s, Lily Tomlin was electric. From Laugh-In to the silver screen, she was redefining what it meant to be a female comedian: brilliant, weird, fearless. Yet for all her boundary-pushing work, she remained cautiously silent about one thing: her love life. Behind her trailblazing persona was a deeply loving, long-term relationship with writer Jane Wagner, a relationship that stayed mostly private for decades. Tomlin never beard-dated or publicly denied her sexuality, but she also never officially came out. In the 1970s, her management warned her that any acknowledgement of being a lesbian would destroy her rising career. That was the chilling reality, even for someone as beloved as Lily. She and Wagner quietly collaborated on numerous projects, including The Search for Signs of Intelligent Life in the Universe, which mirrored their bond and understanding. Friends and colleagues knew, but the press never asked directly, and she never volunteered. It was a tacit agreement, a way to live without making waves. It wasn't until the 2010s that she publicly confirmed what many had known. But back in the 70s, staying quiet was an act of self-preservation. Tomlin's courage came not in confrontation, but in authenticity, proving you could live your truth without shouting it and still make people listen. Mercedes McCambridge, an Oscar-winning actress known for her intense, sometimes terrifying performances, most famously, the voice of the demon in The Exorcist. Mercedes McCambridge lived with battles far deeper than the ones on screen. She fought alcoholism, religious guilt, and a lifetime of repression. In Hollywood circles, whispers about her sexuality were common, but she never publicly acknowledged her relationships with women. Raised Catholic and deeply devoted to her faith, McCambridge found herself in a painful tug-of-war between who she was and what she believed was right. By the 1970s, she was an aging actress, navigating small roles and public speaking engagements while carrying an invisible burden. Friends who knew her intimately spoke of private romances, most notably with women in the theater and political activism circles. She often turned down romantic roles on screen and chose parts that reflected her complex inner world: gritty, moral, tortured. McCambridge's silence wasn't just about industry survival, it was deeply personal. She didn't want to be judged by a public that saw queerness as deviance. Her demons weren't fictional. They were cultural and internal. Still, she remained a powerhouse, a woman of terrifying talent and emotional depth, who couldn't bear to speak aloud the truth so many already knew. Ellen Corby, best known as Grandma Walton on the Waltons, Ellen Corby became America's favorite grandmother in the 1970s. But behind her wholesome, comforting image was a quiet, defiant truth. Corby had lived for decades with a woman, and Hollywood never dared speak of it. Her partner was Stella Lucetta, a fellow actress who moved in with Corby in the 1950s. They remained together until Corby's death, sharing a life of deep affection and devotion. Yet not once did the press ask or report on their companionship. Why? Because Corby played the game perfectly. She embodied the conservative, matronly archetype Hollywood adored, and she kept her private life tightly sealed. The industry, too, preferred to look away, perhaps out of gratitude for her steady performances and comforting image. But the truth was there, in their home, their holidays, their hospital visits. Ellen Corby didn't need headlines or declarations. She simply lived her love, quietly and with integrity. And for decades, she showed us that being closeted didn't mean being loveless. It meant surviving in a time when honesty had a cost. Peggy Gilbert. Peggy Gilbert was a jazz saxophonist, not a screen siren. But in 1970s Hollywood, her presence was groundbreaking. She led all-female jazz bands, fought sexism in music unions, and quietly lived with her life partner, Kay Boley, for over 50 years. Though she didn't grace film sets, her influence ran deep in the studio music scene. Gilbert lived her truth behind the scenes, in rehearsal rooms and concert halls. She was open with friends, fiercely proud of her career, and a quiet rebel. But public acknowledgement of her relationship? Never. The climate wouldn't allow it. In her 90s, Gilbert finally spoke more openly in interviews, reflecting on how society had forced her to separate her personal and professional identities. She became a powerful advocate for older musicians and women in the arts, using her hard-won experience to lift others. Peggy Gilbert's story is a reminder that the closet didn't just exist on screen. It ran through every corner of Hollywood's cultural machine. She may not have hidden who she was, but she knew never to say it too loud. Alexis Smith. Elegant, graceful, and perennially cast as the strong, silent wife or mistress, Alexis Smith's beauty defined her career. Married to actor Craig Stevens, they were the picture of old Hollywood glamour. But insiders quietly speculated that the marriage was one of convenience, and that Smith's heart belonged to women. The 1970s saw her make a triumphant return to Broadway and serious film roles. Still, she maintained a cool, impenetrable persona. No scandals, no gossip, just impeccable poise. But behind that facade, Alexis lived a more complex life. Rumors swirled about her relationships with women in the New York theater world. Though nothing was ever confirmed, her intense, emotional friendships and frequent time spent away from her husband raised eyebrows. Yet both Stevens and Smith played their roles perfectly, dodging the media with practiced ease. Alexis Smith never came out, never confirmed, never confessed. But those who knew her speak of a quiet sadness beneath her grace, a longing to live more freely, to be seen not just as a star, but as a whole woman. These 10 women carried a truth the world wasn't ready for. Behind the glamour and applause were stolen glances, secret letters, and love stories history nearly erased. Today we honor them, not just for their talent, but for their silent courage. Their truth mattered then, and it matters even more now.